March 25th, 2021. My sisters and I learned freedom on the windmill that struck out against the endless yellow landscape of our house in the desert. We would climb to the highest rung, where the wind would whip our sunlightened hair around our ruddy cheeks as we waved down to the others of us that stood eagerly awaiting our turn. We shouted, and we loved each other, fierce and defensively. We had dirt under our glitter-painted fingernails and wore cotton dresses our mother would buy secondhand without bloomers. There were no male creatures around to manipulate our fresh and rowdy forms. We never thought about our crooked country teeth or how many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches we had had that day. We were relaxed in our bodies. We spoke freely, regardless of our audience. We swam in our pointelle underthings in the cow pond out back with the daughters of the ranch hands and the government employees, catching fat toads the size of all of our hands put together and laid out in the white Arizona sun afterwards to dry off. The thin fabric of our panties turned transparent from the water. We never noticed or cared or felt shame. We felt capable and true before we ever learned what that meant or how we weren't supposed to feel that way. We wrestled the neighbor boys on our great big trampoline with aggression we hadn't been taught to suppress or downplay yet, and we always won. We skipped brushing our teeth and hair and said things with conviction that would make the adults around us chuckle nervously and glance at each other. My sisters and I learned freedom on the windmill that struck out against the endless yellow landscape behind our house in the desert. We learned bravery and sisterhood there too. Throughout the dueling horrors of teenage girlhood, we began to suppress our nature, forming, molding, cowering. As we now reach this next stage, each one of us only a year and some months after the next, this stage of womanhood feels like the warm caress of that summertime air we felt so many years ago. I am standing on the highest rung of this windmill that keeps on spinning. The wind is whipping my sun-bleached hair onto my blushing cheeks, and I am waving wildly with my free arm, with a laugh in my woman throat and a wild look of wonder at the world sprawled out beneath me. So that was just a little story about growing up, and all of this is super anecdotal and very true. I have 3 sisters, 2 brothers. We grew up in a very small town. I think the population is around 800 still today. I think maybe a little higher today, but crazy low. We spent our days in creeks and washes, and there was not a single chain in our town. There was the market and the grocery store that was run out of a little house. Only 2 people could fit in there at a time other than the cashier, who we all knew very well. So we were free to just completely be absolutely unhinged for a huge part of our lives. And I feel like each one of us has lived that way. I think there was a time in teenagerhood where we all moved up to a bigger city and we had to interact with other kids, with city kids. And those years were some of the most embarrassing feeling, crazy, shameful years of all of our lives, I think. I mean, we were just trying to fit in because we didn't realize that fitting in meant survival at that kind of place, in that kind of school and environment. I remember one of my sisters, she tried getting into cheer, so she was doing that. She was always a dancer, and she was always scrutinized a lot for being different. And I struggled a lot with basic interaction. I never had to learn how to make friends. Because as a kid, all of the few kids that were in the town and we were all just naturally friends, and barely any new kids would ever come to town. So it wasn't really a skill that I ever had to build up. And even just like interacting with a kid I didn't know was something completely foreign to me. So that was really difficult to get through as a teenage girl. And also, I think it's just there's a lot more of an emphasis on being pretty and well put together and having nice, clean, well done hair, and just very unremarkable but flattering feminine outfits, just things that I never even considered and didn't know how to do. So I feel like all of us kind of went through that. But I think the main point of this entry really is not to complain about how difficult it was for us, because that was just a necessary part of our journey. It was mainly, I think, to say that there's a part beyond that terrible teenager experience that we all have, where you become a woman, and once you get a hold in that part of your life, you realize how similar you are to the version of yourself that you grew out of so many years ago. And I don't know, I think all of us have really begun to flower, and it's just very exciting to see. And also just the freedom it gives you as a young girl to not have any concept of like the male world. I mean, other than playing with little boys in the neighborhood, but that was not ever anything threatening or crazy. And there were so many things that we were sheltered from that we actually really benefited from not knowing. I remember being a teenager and discovering things about men that completely destroyed my optimism and view of the world as a whole. And I think that just continued to get worse and more pessimistic as time went on, and I joined the workforce, and I was working in restaurants and dealing with cooks and having more serious and complicated romantic relationships. There's kind of this like period of time where you're learning a lot about feminism and the habits and thoughts of men and the dynamics between men and women when you're in that between adult and teenager and child. Like all throughout those stages you kind of learn a little bit more and those realizations can become something so obsessive. I remember there was a time when I was full of so much anger of the injustice of everything and the way that we're expected to be. And it just felt so unfair because I knew that the natural way that we all were was completely unaffected by that. And that kind of gave me the proof that I needed to know in my soul that there was no way that anything like that had any validity, if that makes sense. Or I think what was really disturbing to me was that regular behaviors of women were seen as negative, or that like me speaking with conviction or dressing comfortably or, you know, doing any of the various other things that human beings do, that would be seen as me being aggressive or over the top or too much, or arguing, or I don't know, I just never knew that it was like embarrassing or wrong for me to be open about how I think and feel about things. And there was certainly a time when I lost that in myself, and I can say the same for my sisters, except for my older sister, but that's just her being the older sister. She never left that. She never went without that. I feel like she always stood up for what she believed in, and never cared what people thought of her, which I would say the same for all of us, but to different degrees. I think the way I went about it was a little more like I just kind of separated myself from others and was just kind of like a lone wolf for a lot of my teenage years. And she would hang out with everybody, and she was a lot more friendly, but she was comfortable being open with everybody about her opinions on things, which I thought was really cool at the time. And it is. I still think it's cool. But yeah, now I'm certainly able, because I was the loudest, most aggressive, most argumentative, protective kid, especially over my little sister, Sophie, because we were just great friends growing up. But, and we still are, thankfully. But yeah, I feel like I found my way back to that, so I'm happy about that. That's just me reading from my journal. I have many more entries, so maybe I'll do another video like this again. I didn't want to read all of these, of course, because some of them are simply unreadable, and some of them are just a little too wild to really tell anyone about. But I think there's a good few in here that are just little stories like the one I read today. So yeah, that's my journal entry for this week, for this day. I don't know how often I'm gonna do these, but yeah.